My name is Hannah. My parents passed away when I was too young to remember them, so it was just me and Grandma. She was tough as nails, worked every day of her life till she couldn't anymore. When I was 18, she died, old age and a worn-out body, doctors said. Left me a bit of money for college and her old house. I sold the house right after high school. It was too full of memories and too empty without her. Bought myself a small apartment in the city, right next to the college where I started my accounting degree. College life was what you'd expect, classes, studying, and trying to scrape by. I worked part-time at a cafe, pouring coffee and flashing smiles for tips. The days were long, but I managed to graduate with decent grades and even landed a job at a big company downtown. But the evenings, man, they were lonely. You can only watch so much TV and talk to so many walls before you start to feel a bit nuts. That's why I started hanging out with a group from work. Every Friday, we'd hit some dive bar, laugh too loud, and forget about our pile of responsibilities, at least for the night. One of those Fridays, while I was trying to decide between beer or something harder, I met Eric. He was a friend of a friend, or maybe a friend of a friend of a friend, you know how these things go. Eric was different, though. He had this easy smile and a laugh that filled up the room. We got to talking over drinks. "Hey, I'm Eric," he said, that grin all but lighting up the dim bar. "Hannah. So, Eric, what brings you to this glorious establishment?" I asked, raising an eyebrow and taking a sip of my beer. He chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "Same as you, I guess. Friends dragged me out. Said I needed to get out more." "You?" Trying to avoid a night of talking to my furniture, I admitted. His laugh told me he got it. We hit it off straight away. Turned out he worked in IT at some tech startup I had never heard of. We talked about everything, music, movies, the crazy hustle of city life. It felt good to connect with someone who didn't just see me as the quiet girl from accounting. After that night, Eric and I started seeing each other outside of those Friday bar crawls. Coffee dates, long walks in the park, movie nights at his place or mine. It wasn't long before we were pretty much inseparable. Meeting his family was the next logical step, I guess. He'd told them about me, how I was on my own with no real family to speak of. His folks were kind, welcoming. His mom, a sweet lady who always seemed to be hosting some gathering or other, took me under her wing like I was one of her own. His dad was quieter, a stern man but fair, and he gave me firm handshakes and tougher smiles. "Mom, Dad, this is Hannah," Eric introduced me one Sunday afternoon at their family home in the suburbs. His mother enveloped me in a hug. "Oh, Hannah, dear, we've heard so much about you. Any friend of Eric's is family here." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. It's really nice to meet you both," I managed, a bit overwhelmed by their warmth. Eric's dad nodded, his eyes assessing but not unkind. "Good to meet you, Hannah. Eric tells us you're quite the accountant. We could use a mind like yours around here sometimes." That made me chuckle. "I'll do my best to live up to the hype, sir." The day went well, better than I had expected. We talked, ate, and by the end of it, I felt a little less alone in the world. After Eric and I got serious, things moved pretty fast. Not in a bad way, mind you, but in a whirlwind, sweep you off your feet kind of way. A year flew by like it was nothing, filled with those little moments that make you realize you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Eric proposed on a chilly evening in November, right there in the park where we'd taken so many of our walks. It was just us, a few falling leaves, and his nervous smile. He took a deep breath, then got down on one knee, right there on the path. "Marry me, Hannah. I can't imagine this life without you." My heart might have skipped a beat or three. "Yeah? Forever seems like a long time with you, you sure?" "Positive," he grinned, his eyes locked on mine. "Well then, yes. Yes, Eric, I'll marry you," I said, and just like that, we were engaged. Simple, no fuss, just us. That was how we liked it. Planning the wedding was a bit of a circus, with his family diving in headfirst. His mom, bless her, wanted to go all out, but we managed to keep it simple. Just family and close friends at a small venue in the city. Hannah, dear, are you sure you don't want more flowers? And what about the catering? We could do. Mrs. Thompson. I cut in, trying to keep my tone light. Eric and I really want it simple. Small. Intimate, you know? Just the people we love and care about. She looked at me, then at Eric, who was nodding emphatically, and finally, she sighed. All right. You two are the bosses. But let me do the desserts, at least. Deal, I agreed, smiling. It was hard to say no to her desserts, anyway. The wedding day was a blur of smiles, vows, and a lot of dancing. Eric's dad gave me a hug, a real one this time, and whispered, "Welcome to the family, Hannah. We're glad to have you." "Thanks, Mr. Thompson. I'm glad to be here," I whispered back, surprised at the moisture in my eyes. After the wedding, life settled into a new normal. Eric and I returned to my apartment, now officially our place. It felt right, him being there all the time. His job kept him busy, and so did mine, but we made it work. Weekends were our refuge. Sometimes, we'd drive out to his parents' house in the suburbs, other times we'd just laze around at home. It wasn't perfect, no family is, but it was real, and it was mine. And as I learned back when I was just a kid with my grandma, that's about as good as it gets. When Eric told me he was going to be away for a year on a business trip, I didn't quite realize how quiet our apartment could get. It was one thing to miss him, another to navigate the silence of an empty home. But life throws curveballs, and you gotta learn to catch 'em or duck. A few months into his trip, Eric's dad got sick. Really sick. One evening, Eric called, his voice tight with worry. "Hannah, it's Dad. He's not doing well. Could you check in on Mom? Maybe stay with her for a bit?" The concern in his voice was enough for me. "Of course, I'll head over tomorrow." "Don't worry, babe, I've got this." Arriving at his parents' house, I was struck by how much had changed. The place looked worn, a bit like how his dad must have been feeling. His mom, usually so vibrant, looked tired to her bones. "Hannah, thank you for coming," she sighed, pulling me into a tired hug. "Don't mention it. Let me help around here. You focus on him," I said, setting my bag down. As days turned into weeks, I took over the cleaning and cooking. It wasn't exactly my dream job, but seeing the relief on his mom's face made it worthwhile. Evenings were spent sitting with his dad, reading out loud from his favorite books. He loved old westerns, and even though they were never my thing, I got pretty good at drawing like a cowboy. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, his mom dropped a bombshell. "Hannah, you know, with Frank out of work now, we're strapped. The bills are piling up." I hadn't realized how bad it had gotten. "I'm sorry, it's been tough all around." She bit her lip, hesitating. "Could you, maybe consider renting out your apartment? If you moved in here, it would help a lot." The request hung in the air, heavy as the evening humidity. Renting out my place hadn't crossed my mind, but neither had ignoring a family in need. "Okay, I'll figure something out. Let me make some calls tomorrow." After a week of hustling, I managed to rent out my apartment. The extra cash felt good to have, not just for me, but for them. Every month, I transferred money to his mom and took care of the groceries and some bills. It wasn't my money anymore, it was ours. Living there wasn't easy. My commute to work doubled, and the early mornings and late nights started to wear on me. But you don't bail when things get tough, especially not on family. Things took a harsh turn when Frank, my father-in-law, got worse. He was bedridden, barely talking, his world reduced to the four walls of his bedroom. The doctors shuffled in and out, their faces grim, their treatments failing to make a dent in his illness. It was a tough time, and the air in the house grew heavy, filled with the kind of silence that weighs on you like a wet blanket. In the midst of all this, Lisa, Eric's sister, decided to show up. Now, Lisa and her dad had a rocky history. bad blood that didn't seem to thin with time. When she walked into the house, you could feel the temperature drop a few degrees. Her arrival didn't sit well with anyone, least of all her father. One day, he asked me to lean closer to him, a serious look on his face that told me this wasn't just a casual chat. "Hannah," he whispered, his voice hoarse and weak. "You need to watch out for Lisa. Don't turn your back on her." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "I'll be careful, Frank. Thanks for the heads up." "No, really, Hannah. She's not a good person. Keep your eyes open," he insisted, his grip tightening on my arm before letting go. I took his words to heart, but nothing could have prepared me for what Lisa brought into that household. From day one, she made it clear she wasn't there to help. I was cleaning up in the kitchen when she sauntered in, her eyes scanning the room like she owned the place. "Looks like you've settled into your role here, huh, Hannah?" she smeared, her voice dripping with disdain. I straightened up, facing her. "I'm here to help out. That's what families do." She laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the kitchen walls. "Well, don't expect any help from me. I'm not here to play maid or nurse. That's all on you." Her words stung, but I bit back my retort. Arguing seemed pointless, she was like a wall, nothing good was getting through. From then on, Lisa did as she pleased. She'd order takeout just for herself and her mom, leaving their trash strewn across the table for me to clean up. If I ever brought it up, trying to keep the peace, she'd brush me off with a wave of her hand. "Clean it up, Hannah. That's what you're here for, right?" Her sharp voice would cut through any pretense of civility. It wasn't just the messes or the cold shoulders, she started turning her mom against me too. Whispered conversations behind closed doors, glances that felt like daggers, the atmosphere grew tense. One night, I overheard them talking in hushed tones in the living room. "I'm telling you, Mom, Hannah's not here for us. She's just waiting to cash in, you'll see." Lisa's voice was insistent, persuasive. Her mom, who'd always been kind to me, sounded unsure. "I don't know, Lisa. She's been a big help." "Help? She's living off Dad's money, what help are we really getting from her?" Lisa's retort was sharp, her words carefully chosen to wound. Feeling like an outsider in a home I'd been part of for months, I retreated to my room, Frank's earlier warning ringing in my ears. It was clear Lisa had her agenda, and I was in her crosshairs. The next morning, I tried to talk to Eric's mom alone, to clear the air, to find some way back to how things were before Lisa arrived. "Mrs. Thompson, can we talk?" I asked, catching her in the kitchen. "It's about Lisa. I feel like there's a lot of tension, and it's making things hard around here." She sighed, a long, tired sound. "Lisa has strong opinions. She's protective of me. Maybe too protective." "I understand, but I'm here to help, not make things harder. I hope you know that," I said, hoping to bridge the gap that Lisa had forged between us. The death of Frank cast a long shadow over the house. It was a grim time, filled with whispered arrangements and the silent shuffle of sympathy cards. Eric flew back for the funeral, his face etched with the kind of grief that words can't touch. "How's everything been here? You holding up okay?" Eric asked me quietly, while we were alone for a moment during the wake. "Yeah, everything's fine," I lied, forcing a smile. It felt wrong to burden him with the household tensions when he was dealing with so much already. Lisa, who had been a whirlwind of trouble just days before, transformed into the picture of a grieving daughter. Her performance was flawless, catering to the guests, dabbing delicately at her eyes with a tissue, her voice soft and somber. Anyone would have thought her heartbroken. But as soon as Eric left, the mask fell off. Lisa reverted to her true self, colder and more calculating than ever. It didn't take long before the uneasy truce in the house shattered completely. One evening after work, I came home to find my belongings piled up in the hallway. My heart sank. I found Lisa lounging in the living room, flipping through a magazine as if she owned the place. "Lisa, why are my things in the hallway?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. She looked up, feigning confusion for a moment, then shrugged. "Oh, those? I'm moving into your room." I need the space. And where am I supposed to go? My voice rose, despite my efforts to control it. She smirked, a cold, amused glint in her eyes. Not my problem, Hannah. Find somewhere else. I was seething, but I bit back the worst of my anger and turned to seek support from the one person I thought I could still rely on. Mrs. Thompson, can we talk about this? She was in the kitchen, and her response was colder than I had ever heard. This is Lisa's house now, Hannah. She's decided to stay permanently, and we need to make room. You'll move into Frank's old room. The dismissal in her tone was like a slap. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was truly alone in what had once felt like a family home. That morning, I woke up with a heavy heart but a clear mind. Enough was enough. I found both my mother-in-law and Lisa in the kitchen, acting like it was just another day. Can we talk? I asked, my voice more steady than I felt. Lisa rolled her eyes but nodded, and my mother-in-law wiped her hands on her apron, turning to face me. The kitchen felt like a courtroom, and I was about to lay down my final statement. I'm not going to live like this anymore, I started, the words tumbling out. I've decided to go back to my apartment. I can't stay here under these conditions. The shock on their faces was almost comical. Lisa's mouth fell open, and even my mother-in-law seemed taken aback. Hannah, please, my mother-in-law began, her tone shifting to something gentler, almost pleading. We didn't realize how hard this has been on you. We can change. Lisa, surprisingly, chimed in, her voice unusually soft. Yeah, I'll help out more. I'll clean, do the dishes, whatever you need. Just don't go. Their sudden change of tune was as suspicious as it was swift. But part of me, foolishly, maybe, wanted to believe that they could change, that we could salvage some semblance of family. So, I agreed to give it another chance. All right, I'll stay for a bit longer. But things need to actually change, I said, skepticism lacing my words. And change they did, at least on the surface. Lisa took over the cleaning, scrubbing surfaces with a vigor I hadn't seen before. My mother-in-law was kinder, her words no longer edged with icy commands. It was like living in a reversed world, and I cautiously began to let my guard down. This peace lasted for a couple of weeks. One afternoon, I came home feeling under the weather, the kind of sick where you just want to crawl into bed and forget the world. The house was quiet, too quiet, and as I slipped in through the back door, I heard their voices drifting from the living room. Just keep it up a little longer, Lisa was saying, her tone hushed but intense. Once she trusts us completely, we'll talk her into selling her apartment. Imagine how much we could do with that money. My heart sank to my shoes. I stood frozen by the door, hardly daring to breathe. Yes, it's a good plan, Lisa. We can really turn things around with that money. My mother-in-law responded, her voice greedy and low. I felt sick, and not just from the bug I was fighting. The betrayal stung sharper than a slap, the realization that their kindness was just a ruse to get to my money. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Packing my things quietly that night felt like a prison break. I couldn't stay another minute, knowing what I now knew. They were plotting against me, using me as a stepping stone to their comfort. The hurt was raw, a gaping wound where trust had once been. I zipped up my last suitcase, my hands trembling. I didn't leave a note. What was there to say? Goodbye to a family that never really was? Thanks for the lies? I locked the door behind me, the click of the latch sounding unusually final. The drive to the station was a blur. I kept glancing at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see them following me, realizing their plan was falling apart. But the roads were empty, it was just me and my thoughts. When I arrived, Eric's face lit up with a mix of surprise and pure joy that I hadn't seen in months. But as soon as the initial reunion excitement faded, his expression turned to concern. Hannah, what happened? You look like you've been through hell, he asked, his voice tight with worry. Sitting down, I took a deep breath, the weight of the past weeks ready to spill over. Eric, there's a lot I haven't told you. Things that your mother and sister, They got really bad. Eric's brow furrowed as he listened. I told him everything, the manipulation, the deceit, the way Lisa and his mom turned against me. How they planned to trick me out of my apartment. He was silent for a moment, then his face hardened. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? I didn't want to cause a rift in your family while you were away. I thought I could handle it, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The next thing I knew, he was on the phone with his mother, his words sharp and unforgiving. Mom, how could you let this happen? Lisa has been a problem, sure, but this? Turning against Hannah when she was there helping you? I could only hear muffled voices from the other end, but the tone was defensive, rising quickly in pitch. I'm telling you, if you don't kick Lisa out and cut this nonsense, you're losing me too. I'm not supporting this betrayal, Eric continued, his voice rising. The call ended with a slam of the phone. Eric was breathing heavily, his usual calm demeanor shattered by the betrayal of his own family. We're done helping them financially. That's it, he said decisively. A week later, I was still reeling from everything when my phone rang. It was Eric's mom. Her voice was as cold as I remembered from our last unpleasant encounter. Hannah, I noticed you stopped the money for the apartment. Why haven't we received anything this month? She demanded, as if nothing had happened. My hand clenched around the phone. You really expect me to continue helping you financially? There was a pause on the other end, and then, we are still family, Hannah. You owe us for taking you in. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Family doesn't use each other, and I don't owe you for exploiting my goodwill. There won't be any more money from me. Ever. The line went dead, but the echo of the call lingered, a sour note in the air. Eric, who had overheard the conversation, came over and put his arm around me. The relief of having him by my side was palpable, but so was the realization of the new reality we faced. His family ties were severed, at least for now, and while part of me mourned the loss, a larger part was relieved. When Eric and I moved back to our hometown, it felt like closing a chapter filled with shadows and starting fresh under a brighter sky. Not long after settling down, I discovered I was pregnant. We decided it was time to leave my old apartment behind. We found a small house in the suburbs, not far from what was rated one of the best schools in the area. A few months into our new life, as I was unpacking the last of our boxes, my phone rang. The screen flashed a name I hadn't seen in months, Eric's mom. My heart sank, but I answered, the old habits of politeness hard to shake. Hannah, dear, I need your help. Her voice was shaky, almost frail. I tensed, memories of past manipulations surfacing. What's going on? It's Lisa. She convinced me to sell the house, took all the money, and left. I've got nothing left. I had to rent a small place, and now I'm working 2 jobs just to make ends meet, she confessed, her voice breaking. I felt a pang of sympathy, quickly stifled by a flicker of suspicion. And you're calling because? I was hoping, perhaps, you could find it in your heart to let me stay with you and Eric. Just for a little while, until I can get back on my feet, she said, the familiar lilt of manipulation edging into her tone. I took a deep breath, the decision clear in my mind. No, I can't do that. You and Lisa chose your path. Now, you need to live with those choices, just as I am living with mine. I hung up before she could respond and blocked her number. It was a hard thing, but necessary. Like pruning back dead branches to let the new growth flourish. A couple of days later, while Eric was setting up the baby's room, I caught a segment on the criminal news. Lisa had been arrested for trying to scam her latest boyfriend out of his apartment. It was a stark reminder of the bullet we dodged. Eric looked over at me as I turned off the TV, his eyebrow raised in question. Lisa's been arrested, I said simply. He shook his head, a mixture of relief and sadness in his eyes. I guess she'll never learn. No, she won't, I agreed, feeling a strange closure. But we've learned plenty. Not long after that, our son was born. Holding him in my arms for the first time, everything else seemed so small, so distant. He was perfect, a little miracle that made all the previous hardships worth it. Our little house became a home, filled with laughter and the kind of love that fills up all the cracks life had made. I learned that moving on wasn't just about putting distance between yourself and the past, but about opening your heart to the future.